sure that gets going. Great, looks like it's gotten started. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Melinda Kelly, and I'm joined today by Tim Bryant, who'll be co-presenting with me today, and we also have a couple other members of our SALC team joining us as well. Feel free to pop your name, affiliation, and location into the chat, as many of you have already done, but if you're just joining us, feel free to do so. Quick housekeeping note, in order to keep background noise and distractions, keep those down a little bit, please be sure to mute your microphone. If you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. We've allowed plenty of time for the presentation, and also time for questions at the end. So we will be referring to the SALC program guidelines and the pre-proposal materials as we're going through this webinar. So please have those handy. And we also are assuming that you're familiar with these coming into today's workshop. Thanks, Tim. He just popped the link into the chat. So as I mentioned, it'll be about 45 minutes today, and we're going to start today just with a quick survey, and then we'll do an overview of the SALC program generally, and then some details about the planning aspect of the program, and then we'll dive into the eligibility and application process, again, for the planning grants. We'll wrap up with timeline and then open things up for questions. First of all, Tim, I just wanted to do a quick check. Is my sound okay? I meant to check that earlier.
Yes, sounds great.
Okay, great. Sometimes these headphones, people say the sound is bad, so okay. So, and I also wanted to start too, just to remind people that the SALC team is available for technical assistance. If you have any questions, I mean, we're not going to really have the opportunity to dive in every project to get to understand all your projects today, but we are available for technical assistance. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions after the call. Or as you're beginning to submit your pre-proposal. The email address to reach out to our team is salcp, SALCP @conservation.ca.gov, and we'll pop that into the chat as well. Move on. Okay, so here's a Tim's going to pop. Tim's busy with the link putting into the chat. So here's a link to a survey. Super quick, super easy survey. It's just got a handful of questions, and it's really just for us to kind of gauge, kind of get a sense for our planning purposes about how many pre-proposals or applications we may be seeing for this program. So the results won't be visible to anybody else or to the public, and we understand if things may change. Again, we're just hoping to get kind of a general idea. So the questions are just simply, do you plan on submitting a round 9 planning pre-proposal? And for those, just as a reminder, while the pre-proposal is not required, but we do highly recommend it. And then the second question is, would you like additional technical assistance? And if so, maybe discuss just a little bit with that technical assistance, where you're feeling you need help. And then there's a space for additional comments, and then just your organization name and email. So if you can just kind of grab that link and kind of fill it out as you can today, it'd be great. So now we'll move on to some of the basic components of the SALC program and the planning grant component of the program. So the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program is a component of the California Strategic Growth Council's Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. The Department of Conservation, in conjunction with the Natural Resources Agency, administers the SALC program on behalf of the Council. So the principal goals of SALC are to protect agricultural lands that support infill and compact development, contribute to carbon neutrality, and build climate resilience, including through supporting sustainable land management practices, support coordinated land use planning, and then support Executive Order N8220 by safeguarding the state's economic sustainability and food security, protecting biodiversity, enabling enduring conservation measures on working lands in partnership with land managers and natural resource user groups. And then finally, also very importantly, is advancing equity and opportunity for all regions of California. So funding, where does the funding come from? So the SALC program will award an amount equal to 10%, gets a little hard to track, 10% of the auction proceeds available from the 20% continuously appropriated to this California Strategic Growth Council for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. So program from, and the funding comes from the greenhouse, stumbled there, from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. SALC has continuous appropriation and generally releases guidelines and application cycles with a similar schedule each year, similar to this year. So, and if you could mute, let me just try a few of these. So the actual funding level for this year, for the 2022-2023 round, which is the round 9 that's currently open, the actual funding amount of that will not be determined until the 4th auction of the greenhouse gas reduction of those funds, which ends this month. The final amount will be determined and announced in September. So it takes a little time to get those numbers. But just for context, last year for the last round 8, SGC awarded $74 million in funding for 24 easement projects, 20 capacity projects, and 3 planning projects. And Tim just popped into the chat, the Cap and Trade website, if you're interested in seeing what the auction proceeds have looked like so far, and to get a sense of how much funding could potentially be available for this round. So there are, within SALC, there are 3 components to the SALC program, and they're all focused on agricultural conservation. There's a Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Planning Grants, which is what we're talking about today, which provides grants to develop and implement plans for the protection of agricultural land at risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on those. And then there's the Agricultural Conservation Acquisitions, which provides grants to protect important agricultural lands under threat of conversion to non-agricultural uses through the acquisition of voluntary permanent agricultural conservation easements or fee title purchases. And then the third component is the capacity and project development grants. This will be the second round. This is a relatively new component of SALC. And these grants will provide grants to expand organizational capacity to develop agricultural conservation acquisition projects. So as I mentioned, we'll be discussing the planning component today. And if you are interested in applying for a capacity grant, you can attend our upcoming workshop tomorrow from 11 to 11:45. And anyone who missed our acquisition workshop can view the workshop slides. If you go to our website, you can see a link to the slides there. And if you would like to see the video, just reach out to us and we can send you a link for that. So again, for registration information, just go ahead and visit the SALC web page. So just to give you kind of a general sense of the program to date, it's wonderful to share these numbers. This is our 9th round. To date, the program has awarded more than $373 million for 168 acquisition projects, 30 planning grants, and 20 capacity grants. Through those acquisitions, approximately 194,000 acres will be conserved. So pretty good to see all that. So now we're going to just kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive into the land use planning grants specifically. And so the purpose of the planning grants is to provide funds to develop plans that conserve agricultural lands. I mentioned this earlier, by designing and implementing land use policies and accompanying strategies that reduce the threat of conversion to non-agricultural uses and reduce vehicle miles traveled. Plans can also recognize and protect other co-benefits of conserving agricultural lands. So keep that in mind as well. And I think the next slide kind of goes into that in a little more detail. SALC incentivizes local, regional, and tribal governments to work closely with stakeholders to develop land use policies and plans that integrate agricultural land conservation where the local planning has the greatest impact on land use, where multi-benefits allow for optimal planning opportunities, and then also that these plans can act as a bridge between state priorities, climate action plans, general land use plans, and other local priority, so that there is that land use tie-in that has a strong tie-in there. So important piece to note. So I wanted to add this slide as well. This is a resource that was put together from one of our consultants, and I think two things about this. One is Tim will pop yet another link into the chat. This is a link to this actual what's called a flip book, and it's something that has been working. It's a really good tool for sort of thinking about these planning grant programs or projects that you'd be developing. And the one slide that I highlighted here is just how the planning grant can bring together multiple stakeholder groups to envision a viable agricultural economy alongside some of the most pressing other interrelated community goals. So, I mean, every community is different, but we really encourage you to kind of, as you're developing your plans, that you're thinking about all these other tie-ins and how that planning document can bring in the community a variety of stakeholders. So it's also, to help think about the conservation of agricultural lands and how that can help guide efficient urban development, avoid greenhouse gas emissions, contribute to sustainable water supply, provide a variety of other benefits. As I said, each community is different, but we really encourage you to keep these in mind as you're developing your project. So as I mentioned, we've awarded funds for 30 grants over the course of 8 rounds of SALC. And we do have at least, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have about 4 years worth of project summaries for each of those projects. So if you go to the conservation, again to SALC, and you go to the funded SALC projects, and if you just scroll down, this is just one, this is the last round, and you'll see where it says project summaries. And if you click on that, there's a single page summary for each of the projects that have applied and have been awarded throughout the time, through the last 4 or 5 rounds of SALC. I find it's a really helpful tool because, as I've mentioned, all the projects are very different. So, and I'll also next I'm going to just highlight 2 real quick. So the County of Ventura, this is one that's just kind of finishing up right now, but in coordination with the Ventura County Farm Bureau and the Nature Conservancy, they developed a sustainable agricultural, SALC application, which was awarded in December of 2020. This particular program is focused on development of an agricultural conservation planning strategy. Their Resilient Agricultural Lands Initiative, so their RALI is how they're calling that, to protect agricultural land and to address the current threats of land conversion to urban uses in that county. The SALC grant funds were used to assist the county in developing their planning strategy in coordination with a broad range of stakeholders, community outreach, and community input. The primary deliverables of that was the completion of an economic analysis and risk assessment of Ventura County agriculture, the prioritization and mapping of agricultural lands, creation of a land protection incentive structure for landowners, and the creation of an education and awareness strategy to engage the public and policymakers. And as I mentioned, the county's kind of wrapping up that work now and getting ready to present that plan to the county's Board of Supervisors. And the next project I want to highlight is one that finished up about a year ago. It's in Madera County. It was a groundwater project. So the SALC planning grant provided funding for the County of Madera to design and adopt a process by which they would identify lands affected by the state SIGMA requirements, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I think most of you know that, and to create an incentive structure to encourage alternative farming practices and land uses to promote agricultural economic viability and groundwater recharge in the county. So finding that nexus there and the balance. So their particular program study include the primary objectives of developing criteria for identifying and prioritizing land for its potential to be temporarily rested, permanently retired, or retired and restored. So a variety of different scenarios as they went through that analysis. And also included in that was an incentive program structured for resting, retiring, restoring, and protecting lands under alternative water-centric conservation easement scenarios. So, and with that, now I will hand it over to Tim to discuss the eligibility criteria.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you hear me okay, Melinda?
Hear you perfectly. You sound great. Thanks, Tim.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the next 2 slides are going to detail the eligible applicants, and so we have a list here that you can read through, all of which have some sort of degree of land use or transportation planning authority. And on the next slide, you can see it expands to RCDs, academic institutions, land trusts, and so forth. So these require a memorandum of understanding with, so for example, with the resource conservation districts, they have to have a mission related to ag preservation, and they would need, like all the others as well, there needs some sort of agreement or partnership, specifically like an MOU with so some sort of entity that, like you see on the prior slide, that has that necessary land use and transportation planning authority, provides more, just hopefully results if they have that sort of partnership in place. And at a minimum, this is detailed in the guidelines, but in terms of the MOU, at a minimum, what we would be looking for is that it demonstrates that this partner would demonstrate support for the project and for the SALC purposes, detail the roles and responsibilities between the 2 parties, and include language that the partner from the first slide, one of those partners from the first slide, that they would consider adopting the plan at the end of the project. And so those covers the eligible applicants. And then the next slide here lists some of the, Linda touched earlier on there's been 30 projects, 30 grants for planning projects to date. They span the entire state. Each is different in terms of, the goals and the partnerships. But generally speaking, we're trying to assist the development of innovative and consensus-based plans that establish goals, policies, and objectives. They're I guess generally vague. They're provide a general framework, such as developing plans to protect ag land base or approaches to support infill development, along with agricultural conservation, efforts to avoid GHG emissions, supporting regional food systems, and all of this is to encourage grantees and stakeholders, and others to include, if possible as well, Native American tribes in the planning process. So they were also, for that first slide, shown as they can also be an eligible applicant themselves. And note that in the guidelines, you'll see that work plans are encouraged to be included with your pre-proposal, and they should include and reflect some of those community consensus building activities, including providing education, outreach in regards to agricultural land conservation. And the work plan should also include efforts to convene stakeholder meetings to garner support for the proposed project. And there's a few more examples on this next slide here. These are These are noted in the guidelines, so you can take a look to see. We're just kind of pulling them out. I'm not going to read them all here, but these are just, again, more examples from the guidelines of eligible projects. And so you can please take a look at the guidelines to see that full list. So eligible expenses. As Melinda mentioned earlier, we don't, pre-proposal is not required, but highly encouraged. And if you were to submit a pre-proposal, these are some notes to kind of get you thinking along the right track. Some expenses are eligible, others aren't. So we tried to list under the guidelines here, list the eligible and ineligible expenses. These planning grants can reimburse grantees and participating stakeholders for all project-related eligible direct costs. Again, those are defined more specifically in the guidelines, but it includes staff salaries and other direct costs incurred during the performance of the grant and within the grant term. And any costs incurred outside of that grant term would not be eligible for reimbursement. Some other items that aren't eligible for reimbursement in the guidelines include indirect and overhead, travel, food or beverages, CEQA document preparation. So please be mindful of that. It's within the guidelines, there's an allowable cost section within the planning grant portion of the SALC guidelines, so you can look to that section for more information. And so funding and match, there's a minimum 10% match requirement. Again, that's the minimum. You can provide more if you have more to bring to the project. Those match funds can come from either the applicant directly or from other funding sources. If you have other grants, matching funds from other grants. If your some of the partners want to contribute as well, or donations. So all that can be counted towards that 10% minimum. And the max grant award that can be made is currently $500,000. So that would be the maximum. You can request less depending on the needs of the project, obviously. And the match requirement is not if the applicant is a federally recognized or non-federally recognized California Native American tribe on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission, or a tribal nonprofit with a 501c3 status. If they're either the applicant themselves or if they're a co-applicant, those projects will be prioritized for funding and potentially could receive up to 100% funding for those particular projects. So there would not be a 10% minimum match requirement with those sort of applications. Similarly, if your project provides meaningful benefits to a priority population, as those are defined in the guidelines, those projects also could be eligible for 100% funding. So keep that in mind. If you're interested in having your proposal considered in terms of providing priority population benefits, there is a table. It's called the priority population benefits table in the guidelines, or there's a link to it in the guidelines. I don't know if we have the actual table there, but there's a link, so you can take a look at that to see there's a need to kind of document a need and a benefit, and that gets reviewed on our end here to kind of verify the benefits. Supporting documentation is required to accompany that table for us to help us make that determination. So please, again, you can take a look at that link, find that link in the guidelines, and always, of course, reach out to us if you have questions about how to find it, where to find it, how to use it. Happy to help. Okay, so the pre-proposal, again, it's not mandatory, unlike the other components of our program, but highly encouraged, as I said. So just going to briefly touch on these items just to keep in mind when you're considering putting together your pre-proposal. So at the pre-proposal stage, it's kind of a eligibility review more than anything, and an opportunity to provide technical assistance. So we'll look at the proposal and confirm that it would be an eligible project. And we can provide, at that point, feedback. Oh, am I getting? Yeah. Provide feedback in terms of, if we think it looks like it might be a good fit or not. And the I'm trying to, I don't want to get ahead of myself with the application. Let's see, am I on the right? I'm sorry, I skipped ahead on the slide. Doggone it. That's why I look so weird. Okay, sorry, I jumped ahead to the next slide. Okay.
Oh, to the eligibility, yeah.
Yeah, I jumped to the.
We'll do that next. That's good.
Well, yeah, I was like, why is this kind of off? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so again, let me try this again. Pre-proposal and application. So we're trying to do a quick comparison here. So if you're interested in submitting a pre-proposal, Appendix H of the guidelines contains the planning grant pre-proposal template. It requests information, some basic information, and requests summary, executive summary. There's a list of questions specific to help us kind of understand the project and its potential eligibility. It requests a map, if you have a map, to include that as well. A draft work plan and budget, again, highly encouraged at that point. This is a good opportunity for us to provide technical assistance, so hopefully you'll take advantage of that. We understand that the project might be still coming together and evolving. That's fine. You're not locked in at the pre-proposal stage. It can evolve as you kind of work towards refining your application. But it's just an opportunity, again, to touch base and kind of start that conversation on your proposal. When it comes to submitting your full application, it'll build on what you provided initially through that pre-proposal, similar questions and similar documents. But there's some additional pieces like a fully fleshed out work plan, fully fleshed out budget, and a resolution from your governing body authorizing submittal of the application. If you're going to request 100% funding, we'll need that checklist, as I mentioned earlier. And again, we can help you with the preparation of that document. Stakeholder letters, if you have any letters of support from stakeholders, if you have a letter of support, you can certainly submit those, and we encourage you to demonstrate collaboration for your project. And it also collaboration is considered in scoring, so the more collaboration, the better. It can garner you more points. And now I'm going to hand it back to Melinda. I was trying to steal one of your slides. Sorry about that one.
Thanks, Tim. Actually, but it's good to keep this piece in mind as you're doing the piece, both the pre-proposal and the application, just in terms of what we're looking at for eligibility and what the selection criteria is going to look like. So the distinction here is the pre-proposals, as Tim touched on, is that pre-proposals will be reviewed for eligibility only. So at that first stage, the pre-proposals that are submitted will make sure it's an eligible applicant, it's consistent with the SALC goals, clearly stated, avoids greenhouse gas emissions, and supports the implementation of an adopted draft sustainable community strategy, demonstrates consistency with California's planning priorities. And those narrative questions that are included within the pre-proposal packet will help sort of flesh those out for us. So, and then at that point, and it's great if you can to provide a draft work plan and a draft budget. If you do decide to do those, include those sort of templates for those are actually in the application package. So, but it's great to see those, even though, you know, you may not have all the details yet, but just to kind of, so it gives us an opportunity to give feedback on those things essentially. So after we send back feedback from the eligibility in terms of from your pre-proposal, then we move on to the application process and those additional items that Tim mentioned. And once we receive those, we will score them using the selection criteria noted here, using that point structure. They'll be ranked based on their score. And applications will be awarded points for each selection criteria on a sliding scale from 0 to the number listed in the selection criteria table. All information submitted in the application package will be used by reviewers to evaluate the proposal and should demonstrate how effectively the proposal is going to meet the SALC goals and objectives. So the details of the selection criteria and what we're looking for there, you can find in more detail in the guidelines, but essentially, like the project need, for example, does the proposal identify a threat of agricultural land conversion and the need to develop a land to address that threat? And co-benefits, what other co-benefits are being included within that, you know, within that proposal, and sort of harkening back to that connect the dots slide earlier. Is there other environmental, public health, cultural, or other co-benefits that are included within that plan? And then collaboration, again, as we've mentioned a few times, is a really important piece. There's a variety of other stakeholders out there that would be valuable partners within this process. So we would highly recommend building that team out. And then also the planning integration. Does this proposal document how the project will leverage other permanently protected lands to promote resource efficient development, and does it complement other efforts in the project geographic area? You know, is there a regional scope? Are you partnering with other folks in your region? Those kinds of things we're looking at there. And then the equity opportunities. Does the proposal benefit a priority population or residents of priority populations? So that you know, that can work in tandem with or separately from the priority populations checklist. If you decide, you know, it could still be a project that benefits priority populations, but you may not necessarily be applying for that priority populations, or it could be both. So again, it's outlined in the guidelines. So take a look there for more details. And now I'll just talk briefly about the timeline and then open things up for questions. So at this point in time, folks, I'm sure, busy working away on their projects and kind of developing how they want to present that in the pre-proposal. Pre-proposals are due at the end of June, so a little over a month from now. We'll take a look at those, and as I said, we'll go through the eligibility review and then provide feedback to those pre-proposals probably about a month later in late July. And then from there, the applicant can work on developing that final application, and those are due on September 8th. And for that process, we'll do both eligibility review and selection criteria that I just kind of outlined. Once we made a determination on projects to move forward, we will provide a list to the Strategic Growth Council for them to award. We'll provide our recommendations. And typically those are all the SALC grants are awarded at the December SGC meeting. They have occasionally, sometimes it might be a little bit earlier, but at this point we're targeting the mid-December SGC meeting. And then once those are awarded, we send out award letters to the grantees that have been awarded, and then we work on getting those grants into contract generally in early March. So work can start in earnest once the grantee is entered into has an executed grant agreement. So that's kind of the whirlwind tour of the SALC planning grants. I know there's a lot more to them than just that, but really wanted to highlight today sort of that pre-proposal project and see if there's questions left. Didn't leave quite as much time for questions, but we are happy to stay on, so for a little bit longer. And again, I just wanted to reiterate that we're available for technical assistance in advance of these deadlines, so please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to talk a little more about the projects. And then I know some of you that are on this call are also working with some of our TA providers. Thank you to UC A&R and Cultivate that are helping to develop some of these potential planning grants out there, which we're excited to see. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. See if anyone has any questions or musings. You can pop them in the chat, or you can feel free to raise your hand. Did we cover it all, or did we overwhelm you? Hopefully didn't overwhelm you. For the planning, is it mainly government agencies that are applying? We've had a mix. We've had some definitely government agencies, a lot of those, but we've also had, there's a couple RCD projects that are working with they might be working with like a LAFCO or another sort of regional planning group. We also last year awarded a grant to the Hoopa Valley tribe, so that was a tribal, I mean, that is a government, but different kind of government. And trying to think if there's been others, but it is open to others, you know, as you can see in the list, you know, there are potential for other folks, but we do want to see that there's a tie-in to land use planning that has that has durability over time. That's kind of that's the big picture of it all, is to protect land and for the long haul, and have things in place that will help to build that durability. But that's not exclusive, so just to let you know that. Okay, I lost my chat. Oh, there it is. Okay. Let's see. Next question is, I got to planning grant, blah, blah, blah. Nonprofits. Yes. Smaller projects for farmers working on conservation, potentially. I mean, I think there's a lot of creative ideas out there, and there's some potential projects that would look different from some of the ones we've had already. So I think it would be great to have those conversations. You know, happy to set up a TA call for that. You know, again, we'd want to harken back to some sort of land use plan that has some durability. But that doesn't, you know, I think that's an opportunity, whether within this cycle or a future cycle, is to start to build those relationships. So there may be an opportunity to do a project where you have a smaller nonprofit that's focused on farming, maybe working with someone within the state planning space or Farm Bureau or others like that. So we can kind of brainstorm some ideas there. In regards to the co-benefit scoring on the application, if we don't anticipate having collaborators, will it hurt the applicant's score or chances? Well, again, those are going to be like, so there was one of the selection criteria was collaboration, so you probably wouldn't score well on that one. But not everyone necessarily scores super high. You know, you may score low on that, but really high on another thing. So it's sort of a mix, and that's in terms of the selection criteria, you know, there's 4 or 5 different buckets. So it offers up that opportunity for scoring. You know, you're not completely out just for one thing, but we do highly encourage that collaboration, as we've mentioned. So, and let's see, Marcia's asking, can a land trust be a primary applicant with MOU from one of the other agencies? Yes. Sorry, no benefits meant collaborators. Yeah, I think I addressed that, Justin, but if you have more questions, let me know. And then Steve is asking, for follow-up consultations, who would be the best individual to contact for questions in the Fresno County area? Steve, who are you with? I don't know if I have your organization. I know Chandra, so we did have UCA&R we do have a technical assistance person that was working in the Central Valley, but she's not there at the moment. She left recently. So I think probably the best thing to do, Steve, would be to reach out to me or reach out to the SALC email address, and I can follow up with you to talk a little bit more about the Fresno County work. I know that we've been having some conversations down there, so it'd be great to continue those conversations and see what would work out there. Great questions, folks. Yeah, it'd be great. Just reach out and to set up a call. And Ujamai, I'm sorry if I'm not saying the name right, but yes, please do feel free to shoot an email to that SALC address, salc@conservation.ca.gov, and I'll follow up with you and we can set up a time to chat. You know, in some cases, you know, it may be that a capacity grant might be a better fit versus a planning grant. So it's good to talk about all the different opportunities. Other questions? Well, we really appreciate your time joining us today. It's good to see a nice response. Planning grants are a smaller part of our program, but a really, really, really important part. And as you know, now that we've awarded 30, we're starting to see sort of next steps that are coming out of those planning grants, and it's really exciting to see. So, you know, some of these planning grants ultimately lead to other acquisition projects, or in the case of Madera County, for example, they developed that plan through SALC, and then they later applied for a land repurposing, multi-benefit land repurposing grant to help them kind of take it to the next step and start prioritizing where to do projects, where to fallow land and convert it into restoration projects and other things. So it's nice to see how these grow up, so to speak, over time. A little more time, and then please, again, if you have that link handy for the survey, it would be great if you could fill that out just to give us a sense. And then also there's an opportunity there to note if some technical assistance would be helpful. And I will be following up either later today or tomorrow with links to the recording for today, as well as the slides. But with that, then I think I'll say give you back, let you take the rest of what's left. Go out and get some fresh air before you jump back into your day. Thank you all. Appreciate you joining us today.